That's
Works
quite
for
the
me.
answer. All
Works for
right.
me.
Well, here we are, everyone, for another episode of Dualistic Unity Raw. It has been an incredible day. I have to admit, I have been busily interviewing people for our new position of advertising sales agent. I have talked to quite a few people, and there are two or three individuals, especially, that are just lit up about the idea of working with us. They see the potential, not just in terms of revenue, and what I mean. See, it's funny. I was going to say residual revenue, and I don't know where it went, but in terms of residual revenue, but also in terms of growing this discussion, because of course, the more sales that we can get for advertising space on the podcast, the more revenue that we're bringing in for the community. Because as Andrew and I have said numerous times, there's a cap on our income, because the entire point of this is to spread all of this as much as we can. So that billboard in Times Square, it's getting closer to being a reality. And if we can find people who share this path, who want to work from home, who are able to have those conversations with people. And again, it's not pushy. We're not in any way trying to sell a product like you need to buy this, you're going to be better for it. It's really just reaching out to advertisers who are already promoting their product on similar podcasts. It's a very soft sell scenario. And I know that after years and years of sales. If it wasn't for the fact that we're so busy, we would do it ourselves. But the fact that we can bring in some people, and I'm not going to say we're not choosy about it, by the way. If you come to an interview, I had somebody yesterday who came to an interview who was unfortunately just a little bit too hungry for the money, and didn't really care about the content, and so at that point, we're not calling that person back. And it's no offense to them whatsoever. It's just that the integrity of our community is really important to us. The fact that when somebody comes into the community, if they're trying to peddle some kind of an ideology or a belief or something like that, the rest of the community will question them. That is something that I want us to keep in mind with our advertisers. We don't want to bring advertisers into the podcast who are trying to sell snake oil, because I know each and every one of you is going to go, what the fuck's going on there?
Exactly. And yet at the same time, it'll just fall on deaf ears. So it'll kind of be funny that they're just paying to push this without deriving any benefit, because we just know that no one's gonna be caught by that bullshit or that snake oil or whatever it may come across as. But yeah, then that's the beauty of running our own business, is we don't need to necessarily settle for something we're not feeling, and with things going as they are, and the trajectory and the momentum that we're building and working through right now, it's just exciting to see. And it's really just been like we have all of this sort of structure in place in regards to the podcast and just things, all of these things going on, and now we're at a point where we're able to start filling up some of that ad space and start pulling in some resources to then just do more shit with, do more fun shit where people aren't necessarily going to see what's coming, and doing it from a place of just empathetic connection, just a willingness to do it for the sake of doing it, not doing it for a bottom line, not doing it looking at profits, not doing it trying to satisfy our shareholders and all that shit that every other corporation has to do. It's just doing it to make a fucking ripple, and a lot of times it takes some resources to do that. And for a while it's just been us having a conversation, but as more come in, there's going to be more going out and more opportunities to do things. And it's just very exciting to see where all of that goes and what it ends up being, because that's the thing too, is we don't have goals. We don't have set specific goals. We don't have necessarily a specific mission statement or a thing with an answer tied to it that we're trying to figure out and get to a point where then we've reached achievement. We're just continuing to unfold, as much as the conversation is, as much as Dualistic Unity is. It's all just us in process, the universe in process, reality in process, and just seeing where it goes. We're finding out what all of this is as we go. I think when Dualistic Unity started, we didn't even know what the fuck it was. I still don't really know necessarily what the fuck it is, but we're starting to get at least some semblance of an idea as we go, while recognizing, which is just kind of funny, that any idea that we build about it or in regards to it also isn't it. So it's just exciting because there isn't so much weight when you're trying to get to a certain spot. When you have a specific goal in mind and then, a deadline that you have to get to, it's just continuing to find out what happens and be enthusiastic about it, and things are happening and things are shifting and changing and growing, and it's very exciting, but it's able to stay light because we don't have expectations of what we think it should be or where we necessarily think we should be.
I find it really funny because when you get really caught up in something, could have been when you were younger or whatever it is, and maybe you were building a model train, or maybe you're working on your car, or you're building a treehouse for your kid, or whatever it is, and you're just so caught up in it. You're just like, this is awesome. This is so much fun. I'm really having fun doing this challenging thing. All of my attention's in it, and you forget to eat. You forget it's time for dinner. You forget about your favorite show. You forget about all that stuff because you're just really, really engrossed in it. I find it so funny that I have been so caught up in the experience of Dualistic Unity. And by that, I mean, the podcast, the community, the groups, the retreats, all of it, that I completely forgot I'm a salesman for a year and a half. And I find that really funny because this is what I did before we went full time onto Dualistic Unity, was that I was a salesman. Not only was I a salesman, I was somebody who did administration. I was somebody who recruited salesmen and encouraged them on how to sell certain products. And it never dawned on me in this entire time that we had ad space that somebody could actually be selling for us. And I find that really funny because at one point, because that was my job, that's all I ever thought about was more opportunities. Where can I get more salesmen, or how can I improve the quality of the salesmen that I'm hiring or the ones that I work with? All of a sudden I get into Dualistic Unity, and sales and revenue and profits just not a part of it. And it's just because, what is the point of all of this? That we are all in this together. And so I'm not trying to think about myself. And so it never dawned on me that you can take that skill set, you can take that mentality and apply it to something wherein it's still not about you. Right? We can still focus on making sales. We can still provide an excellent product, or at least excellent offerings, to a community that may or may not resonate with them, but don't have any pressure to buy them whatsoever. And we can use the money from those ads, as we've always said, towards more shit for the community, including giving Amanda a budget. And I think everybody in the community can admit that if Amanda had a budget to do any of the things that Amanda comes up with, we would all be sitting here in awe.
Yeah, that's gonna be an exciting day when she has a budget to do things with, but it's fun that we all have, and I mean, you've been through a number of jobs, and I've been even just, 4 years in digital advertising. Like, there's plenty of things I learned from that I'm sure will come into play with everything that we're doing now, and even just, communicating, understanding ad stuff and ad deals and certain the ins and outs of that. Like, there's an understanding there, and so it's amazing when we can bring certain skills together without a need to be seen in a certain way or for certain things to be utilized, and like, oh, this is me doing this, and look at how well I'm doing this. It's just everyone bringing what they have to the table, doing the things that they do best, and finding out where it all leads and where it all goes. And so when there is the collective sort of goal and just being that, it's funny that you got so into that you kind of forgot about everything that you had done previously, and the things and where you came from and all the skills. And it's not to say that you don't utilize a ton of those skills with everything that we do day to day, but like that whole sort of role that you played for a very long time, that was maybe not something that was nearly the passion that you have for Dualistic Unity, but still something that you got very good at. And it's funny timing with things, how, that you just kind of remembered it all of a sudden. You're like, holy shit, wait a second. We can get other people to do this. They can make plenty of money from it if they're willing to do the work. And we get money from it because we already have the ad space available. So it's it's a win-win for everyone involved. And there's absolutely a beauty in that. But it's going to be very interesting to see how all of that plays out. I'm excited to find out.
I am likewise excited to find out. But I have to say that one of the things I really like about all of this, and it's from the conversation I had with somebody early on in the interview process. We're still doing interviews, by the way. If anybody wants to, set up an interview, you can do so. Just join us on our LinkedIn page. You'll find the job posting there. But what was I talking about?
The guy you interviewed
Oh, right.
with.
Thank you. So basically, they were saying that, I've always done sales. I've been doing sales for years, but I've always wanted to be able to sell something that I felt was creating meaningful change. And that is something that I thought to myself for years. From one job to the other, it was just like, oh God, I'm so tired of hyping shit just to survive. But to actually be able to promote something that meaningful, was like the dream. And so often you'd find opportunities and it ended up not being what you were hoping it would be. It ended up falling apart, or the support wasn't there, because again, like you're always throwing seeds in that way. And so now it's kind of nice to be able to provide that product for other versions of me that want the same thing. And so while I may not have found that thing, I'm super excited to be able to give people who really are already in that mentality, people who are already changing themselves, because I mean, otherwise they're not going to jive with this. Every single person who's applying for this position is being told to listen to the podcast. And it's because if you can't take this conversation, you're not going to be able to take like a team meeting. It's not for you.
Yeah, for sure. And I can only imagine, because I've never had a sales role in my life, like never really had to sell outside of, myself in an interview process. But in terms of that sort of cold calling and just being given a product and being told to sell it, like I can only imagine that feeling and the difference between something that you're actually interested in, actually believe in, versus something that you don't, and the energy behind that. So if there's people who see that and they get interested in the podcast, they start to, question some things in their own lives, question some of the things they've been holding on to, some of the stories they've been telling themselves, realizing, oh, maybe I don't have to hold on to that story. Maybe I can just be uncertain and take the next step and keep finding out what I'm capable of. And they start incorporating that, and then their job is to sell this product space on this podcast, talking all about that. I can only imagine how much easier that would be for something that not only you believe in, but you've derived benefit from yourself. A conversation that you actually have is what is being sold. And so I can only imagine the energy behind that, and like the difference in that. It must be felt like, as much as we can try and convince ourselves, like with the whole mainstream manifestation shtick, like, oh, I'm so grateful I have $1 million. It's like you're just lying to yourself. And there's a difference in something that's actually felt and you actually believe in and actually care about, versus something that you don't. And that's sort of, I'm sure there's got to be that sort of fake it till you make it energy with something that you aren't really crazy about, and people feel that, and you come at it, even if you say all the right words, it's still just a different feeling. And that goes for kind of anything. Like there's so many people out there saying things and talking about things that isn't felt, because it's not really about the words, it's not really about what's being said, it's about where it's coming from, like what you are, that it's coming from, what depths of you that it's coming out of. That's really what the insights that hit are those. It's not just the words. It's not just the things that you say. And that's a big component of this conversation. Like a lot of people can say the words really well and they don't mean jack all. Like people can say, oh yeah, I recognize that I'm everything. It's like, motherfucker, do you have any idea what that really means? And you and what you think you are being everything. Because if you're everything, you're not just you. And that I did want to bring up, because it kind of is in regards to this feeling. I had a red eye flight last night, and I ate an edible before I went, because I was like, I've never done that. I could imagine that being really uncomfortable, walking through an airport on a gummy. So I took one, and it was, yeah, it was pretty wild. No, one of the biggest insights that hit me was like, because I started feeling things a lot, and I started to realize like, oh well, if I'm this entire experience right now, the things I'm feeling aren't just me. Like I'm not just feeling me, and that helped so much with the concern because usually, I'll get overwhelming feelings, and I'm like, this is so overwhelming. Like, what am I? And I'll try and find a certainty, and then I'll just label it as something or say something about it. And yesterday, just with being amongst so many people kind of walking around the airport, then on the plane, and then I was like, fucking hey, maybe an edible wasn't a great idea. I'm on a flying oversized soup can across the country, and there's no way to get out of it. And but I was totally fine. And so I realized that if I'm feeling everyone, and the things that I'm feeling aren't necessarily just me that I'm feeling, then it's almost like if we understand that, then what I am is spread amongst everyone. And then as soon as there's a concern, it's like all of that energy that is spread and not disconnected from me and spread everywhere is like honed in to me, and all of the focus is on me. But I don't see someone else do something like, say trip over their shoelace, and all of my energy go into that experience. It's just kind of brushed off. And yet when something like that would happen to me, it's like all of the feeling would get honed in and kind of pinpointed into me. And a lot of the time I was walking around realizing I'm equally everyone else walking around here. And like I've talked about this before, but it's funny every time it happens, it's like new and fresh, and it's not just the words. It's like I was feeling all of it. Like I didn't feel disconnected from anything. And with that came the realization that, oh, the feelings that I'm feeling aren't just mine.
Well, they are, but they're not just
Yeah.
Andrew's. And that's kind of the funny part about it, right? Like we just forget that in the same way that a cell forgets that it's being impacted by the rest of the body, right? Because it's so involved with its own experience and its interpretation of its experience, and all of that fun stuff. So yeah, you just relaxed into something that you feel pretty much the rest of the time. You just distract yourself one way or another from feeling it, which is always kind of funny, right? Because when we go into a room and there's a collective tension, we feel that tension. We really do. And you could say like, oh, that sounds all kind of wooey and whatnot, but it's measurable. Like you can look at it. I mean, even plants that are stressed out, have an impact on the other plants that are around it. And so it's this idea that we're separate that unfortunately makes us think like these are all just my feelings. I am suddenly anxious because there's something wrong with me specifically, as opposed to, oh wow, there's a lot of attention suddenly being drawn to the present. And it's a different interpretation of what we're going through, but it's that fear response. There's a good quote here that we are more often frightened than hurt and suffer more in imagination than in reality. And that is often the case, right? Like we're paranoid about what? The things that we fear. We're not worried about the things we don't fear, right? Because we're not thinking about them. I always find that hilarious. Like at the end of the day, the fact that it's like, right, and still until I started coming up with things, everything was just now. Like I often come back to this at the end of the workday, for example, like, right, but that's all at work. This is just here. I'm just here now. There's no problem here. I'm in my home. All of the problems are in my head about what's going to happen later or before, right? Somewhere else that doesn't exist right here, right now. And so all of a sudden you kind of just slough that off. You're like, I'm just going to feel what I'm feeling then. And isn't it funny? As soon as you take away the narrative, you take away the idea that it's about you, there's something wrong, you got to fix it. You kind of just go, all right, I'll just sit through it then. And it passes.
Yeah, it passes so much more quickly than you expect too, because it's like the issue isn't the thing that you're thinking about, it's the thinking about the thing. It's the thinking itself. And as that settles, as you realize, oh, there's no way to solve this in my head right now. There isn't a point that this gets solved. there isn't even a way oftentimes when we mull over things in our head to solve it in that moment. And so we're creating it in order to be solved to give our mind something to do. It's like it just wants something to do. It's like I just want to fucking chew on something or mull over something or deal with something. And we give it lots of things. There's always the potential to give it something. And that's what I've realized a lot recently too, is just how there's always in any situation the potential to be excited, to be afraid, to be worried, to be concerned, to be like look forward to it, to enjoy it. Like all of the potentials of every situation are always there in every situation. It's not about the situation necessarily. There's always the potential to be concerned or to be excited or to enjoy it or hate it, or at least enjoy it more or hate it more. Like there's always the potential to take it to another point, to make it more difficult than it is. It's not to say that like, oh, accepting it makes it easy. It's just that it leaves it at the difficulty level that it is. It doesn't make it more difficult. As you get caught up fighting it or wishing it was different or thinking that it should be different, it's like that resistance comes up to it and then it just gets more difficult. But we have this idea like, or we can have this idea where we think, oh, well, if I just accept it, it's gonna go away and it's gonna be great. Or if I just sit through it, it's gonna be amazing and it's gonna be fine. Well, it isn't. And I wish it was different. And then it's just gets like we have so many ways we can make it so much worse. But it's not always about making it what we prefer. Sometimes it's just at least leaving it where it's at. And sometimes that's just enough.
Yeah, we haven't mentioned it yet, but we should. And it comes down to the fact that we have a call-in show right after this. At the top of the hour, we're going to be live on twitch.tv/dualistic unity, and you can join us for up to 10 minutes on the episode. You just got to go to a website address and just click the little box saying that you agree that it's going to be a podcast episode after the fact. And then, yeah, if you have any questions or if you'd like to share a story or if you would like to disagree with us, that is all part of the option of the call-in show, and we look forward to talking to you if you would like to join us. I just want to throw that out quickly. Somebody also asked, what's the job that we were talking about? And so I'm going to throw up the QR code here. Again, you can find us on LinkedIn, or you can just snap a picture of that and go to the website there, and that will give you all the details of the job, the commission rate, what it is we're looking for, and how you can get involved.
Hell yeah. Yeah, and that's the beauty of that role, is that there's more than one person. It's really up to you, and how much money you make is very much up to you and your willingness. Like there's lots of room in the podcast to get a lot of advertisers in there. And so the sky is more or less the limit. It just depends on how much you want to put in, how much time you want to put in, and how much effort and energy you want to put into it, because there is the opportunity for output. It's all right there. So yeah, and then call-in show. Fucking excited for that. Those are all always a blast. The last couple have been a lot of fun. I think we've pretty much had like 7 or 8 people call in the last couple. And yeah, so you can call in, get on Twitch, call in, and you get 10 minutes to just chat about whatever you like, and turns into a podcast episode. And you can, yeah, you can, and then you can download it from YouTube yourself and take clips from it if you want and share it on your own social media and then refer people to the podcast. Like someone who has, like, anyone can join and you can promote your business. Like a bunch of people listen to our podcast. You can get on there and talk about something that you want to talk about. It's really open, but the conversation is always great. So yeah, if you have any interest in chatting with us, we're available in a lot of different ways, and you can get on screen with us in our groups. But the call-in show is a great way to get on and get involved in an episode.
There are certain ways that we're not available. I just wanted to make that clear, because while we are available in a lot of different ways, there are limitations to that. You can use your imagination as to what that means. I wanted to explore something very quickly because I had a response to the dress video that I had reposted on TikTok about how, it's a dress. That's pretty much it. like, the fact that it's for a woman is kind of an irrelevant concept. It's dress. The point is that I'm not naked, which is really the important part. Somebody wrote back, well, using the concept dress and naked invalidates your point. And so it dawned on me that what they think my point is that we shouldn't use concepts at all. And I said, well, try talking without them. And so that's impossible. Of course, language is based on concepts. And so I just wanted to mention very quickly, and I made a response video on TikTok about this. The point here is not to not use concepts. It's to recognize that concepts are not truth, and that concepts, by their very nature, are dualistic and therefore divisive. For you to have a concept of something, that thing must appear separate from everything else. The concept is the division or the difference between it and everything else. Like we have a concept of water and a concept of land. They are both the same thing, energetically expressed differently. So we use concepts to differentiate them. That is all. But difference does not imply division. And so while we use language and we use concepts and we use divisive ideas all the time, they can get taken out of hand. We can use them as tools, or they can get carried away and become wars. And so the point of the video wasn't that you shouldn't use concepts. The point that we're making on the podcast is not that you shouldn't use concepts, it's that concepts have power. If you wield them without knowledge, you can cause a lot of damage. And so it's the responsible, aware, empathetic use of concepts. That is the point we're trying to make. So while the concept of address, and again, I said this in the TikTok video, I'm kind of repeating myself because, you may not go see that. While the concept of address is useful to say fabric in a certain design, the concept that that dress can only be used by women is needless and divisive and originates with a need to self-validate. This is what I do. This is what people like me do. People like me don't do this. So you're looking for self-validation, a sense of value, a sense of security, a sense of who you are. And that is very different than identifying a difference in something, identifying an object. This is about you identifying yourself. And that identity can change and is malleable and is fictional. But the more you hold on to it, the more divisive of a person you are. And so it's not about not using concepts. It's about recognizing the damage that they can cause when you're not aware of how divisive they are.
Well said. It's almost like there's layers to the concepts in a sense. Like there's a layer that's still a concept, but very close to the reality. Like address, for example, as you said, fabric. And then the next conceptual layer is dress, like labeling it in a specific way. And then the next one's like women's dress. It's like the whole time it's the same thing with like, fabric, dress, women's dress, whatever, and then whatever is above that. And each time it's like, yeah, they're all concepts, but some are further from the truth, some are closer to the truth. And the further from the truth you get, the more almost like the more divisive it is, the smaller the group that's able to use it is, but it's still completely made up. It's still totally arbitrary. And the further you get from it, the more consequences there's going to be to utilizing that and taking it as truth, because it's further from the reality. Like there's more ideas that go along with it. And it's almost like there's more ideas utilized, say, with fabric. Fabric is much more of a sort of objective statement. There's not a ton of detail or nuance in regards to it. It's more of a general term, whereas dress is more specific. And then women's dress. And women's dress then brings in all these other concepts. It's like women's things. Like that brings in the conceptual idea of a woman and what that is, and femininity. And does femininity equate to being a woman? No, it doesn't. But we've equated the two. And so we think that feminine equals female when it doesn't. And so there's all of these concepts now brought in. And the further you get, it's not to say that they're not still concepts. And it's the only way, as Ray said, it's the only way to communicate. You can't communicate without concepts, but it's how invested you are in the deeper and further layers you get from the reality of what it is and how many concepts you're tying together to express a certain thing, and how malleable those are. Like, your idea of a woman's dress isn't going to be my idea of a woman's dress, but our ideas of fabric may be closer to each other. And the more you add to it, the further that split gets, and the more distortion in the communication there is, because there's more assumptions when I say that's a woman's dress versus that's a piece of fabric. And so it's not to say they're not both concepts, but there is an important recognition there that that one is almost further from the truth than the other.
Right. And then you can take it further. Well, who made that clothing? What brand is it? Right. Or is it fashionable? Is it in season? Right. Or, is it this year's design? Right. All of these things are just more and more reasons to judge everybody who's not keeping up to that very small little niche. And every time it's just adding more and more definition to what is essentially just a pile of goddamn fabric and thread. But we forget that because we're lost in the identity. We're lost in what these things mean to us. And we get idea like, oh, yeah, but it's cultural. It's like, that just means it's a long-term habit. That's really all that means. And it doesn't mean it can't be changed. Anything is cultural if we're doing it, because we're the culture, and the culture changes when we become more creative. Other than that, it's just more memorization and repetition, which is not culture. That is a dying culture. And the way that happens is that we get so lost in our concepts that all of a sudden everything must fit within certain categories. And the more you categorize things, the less fluid they become, the less creative you can be. It has to fit within a certain box. And that makes it very, very difficult for us to continue to grow as a culture.
Yeah, because the more narrowed down it gets, the less space there is to move around, the less freedom there is in it, the more there's tied into that, and how closely you identify with one thing or another, or your opinion of a certain thing, and the way things should be and the way other people should be. And I think that's a great point. With culture is such an interesting thing, like the maintenance of culture as opposed to it again being an expression of what we are here and now. It's like it's something we have to buy into in order to feel a little bit more secure. Like, this now means something about me because there's been this culture for hundreds, for thousands of years, and we're maintaining that. It's like we're always dragging the past with us. And it's like a horse pulling a carriage, and all of the culture is like the shit on the carriage, and we just keep dumping it on as it goes, maintaining that instead of cutting the string. And the horse is there exhausted pulling this massive carriage. It's like, gotta maintain it, gotta maintain that thing. It means something. It's important to me, important to our ancestors. And it's like, yeah, but it doesn't, like, where does that come from? Is it just another desire for comfort in that, or false certainty, and like, oh, this is how it's been, and this is how it should always be, and it's always going to stay this way, and I don't want to try something new or think for myself, or reset this culture or work on another culture, or just let go of the whole idea of culture and just be what is right now, not needing to maintain an idea of what's been, and cut the strings on that carriage, and just let the horse run free instead of dragging all that fucking weight around all the time.
Oh, but that's terrifying because of how far we've come from the point of actually being aligned with reality. Right? It really is. Like, we are so invested in this current way of life and current way of thinking and current way of doing things. Like I was saying to you before, like even our clocks, right? Like the fact that we use like 60-second minutes and 60-minute hours and all of that stuff is derived from ancient Sumeria, because they used a counting system that was based on 60. How many of us even know that? Why wouldn't we know that? Well, because we just use it. Well, why do we use it? Well, it works. And so all of a sudden we've totally lost the entire point of what we're doing. We just use it over and over and over again. It kind of becomes like the banking system. Like 100 years ago, 12-year-olds could tell you where money came from. Right now, nobody has any idea how the banking system works for the most part, because nobody wants you to know. We just know that it works, and we carry on chasing our iPads and our iPhones and whatever comes out next. Right? Just got to go and use the debit machine. Just hold on a second. That kind of thing. And so it's just really interesting how we get caught up in old habits, and the idea of tearing it all down. And not by tearing it down, I don't mean like all of a sudden we have to like destroy the cities and walk away from the infrastructure and all that shit. That's hilarious. But what I mean by that is just the mentality that drives it. Right? To stop assuming this is the only way to live, to actually start listening to one another, to one another's ideas, to one another as we grow together, and to take responsibility for what's happening from the ground up. But that means a lot of different changes in our system and the way that we live and the way that we see each other. There's a lot of things, but it's easier just to fall back on habit. I do find it particularly interesting, though, that as people explore spirituality, they almost instinctually end up going back to their ancestors. And what I mean is that they have this kind of idea, or rather this feeling, that we were closer to the point long ago. And I think the mistake there is that we try to go back. We try to do what we think they did instead of going to the place in terms of a state of mind that they were in. And that state of mind was not relying on what came before. That was the state of mind, was to be fresh and creative in the moment, and then to create quote unquote culture as a result of all of us doing that. Right. But over time, we just lose it. Like, this is something that happens all the time. It really is. One of my favorite books, I've talked about it before, Small Gods by Terry Pratchett, is about how a religion can start based on faith in this deity, or the idea of a deity, and eventually become just faith in the church, and eventually just fear of the church. So it just becomes a habit with none of the original fire that created the institution to begin with.
Yeah, like we try and go back instead of doing what they did, or looking at what they did and doing that now. We try and just copy and emulate because it's easier, it's simpler, it doesn't require us to take responsibility. We can just follow what they did and then do that again, just replicate it. And we're always trying to replicate shit, but that's not it. Like, the thing that it wasn't a replica. It was it. And so we're trying to do a replica of a thing that was it, of being just where we're at without looking back or looking forward, or any of it. And yet, like, we don't even realize that, which is funny, interesting, strange, but understandable kind of too. And with the school system, it's interesting how they purposely don't teach us things. And it's almost like you start to realize, like, why the fuck don't they teach how to do taxes, how to do all these different things? And part of it is because there's people who have those jobs. So then you pay them to do it. And so when you start to realize, oh, they're keeping things at bay so that there's jobs, so people can do those jobs, as opposed to people just being able to do it for themselves. So they purposefully make it really fucking confusing so that some people can learn it and then get paid to do it, which, isn't an inherently bad thing at all. But it starts to make you wonder, like, how much of the system is just sort of a facade. It's just this, like, full circle thing that doesn't go anywhere or do anything besides perpetuate itself. Like, it's not actually progressing anywhere. Like, the current spot we're at, it's not progressing. Yeah, there's technological advancements and shit like that, but in terms of human progress, there isn't. If anything, there's been human regression recently at the cost of maintaining a system that's only goal is to perpetuate itself. Like, that's the main goal, is to stay alive, as opposed to find out, explore, adventure, figure out what could potentially be possible. Just like, oh no, it's uncomfortable to relook at things. Let's just keep things the way they are and keep that train moving.
Well, it's interesting because part of the stagnation almost comes from an overcommitment to the idea of specialization, which is unfortunately something that's going to be a result of us needing to identify with a certain thing to establish our value. And so, what I mean is, you go to school, you learn a certain thing, and then that thing becomes what you are an expert in. And then you stick with that for the rest of your fucking life. Right. And so, in doing so, you are actually losing a lot of other knowledge or the ability to have a lot of other experiences, which would fulfill more of your self-awareness than just being specialized in one particular field. Right. The other cost of that is the fact that you are not taught history as it's being, created, or history as it's being, I guess, discovered. Like, you're not taught any of that. What you are taught is, here's the story that's official, that comes from a historian, who comes from somebody who is specialized in that field. And so that's the only story you get, because it's specialized. It comes from somebody who is accredited. Right. And so there are so many things in history that come in the form of like folklore, or come in the form of small local rural legends or things like that we discount. Right. There's a lot of history that's totally discounted because it's not coming from somebody who has all of those accreditations, or accreditations, or whatever the words. The point is that even in school they will pick a certain book, a certain history, and they never tell you that there's others. There's like lots of others. In fact, this is just one take on it. Right. And so we have that faith in that specialization. This person knows, therefore I just need to listen to them. And we become lazy as a result.
Yeah, like how often we look at something and we're like, "Oh yeah, that's it. That's definitely it." Because we just don't want to look at everything else. Look at the fact that any perspective is just one perspective of a situation. It can't be it. It can't be the all of everything in that individual perspective and that point of view that's then shared. And so often, there's a phrase that history is written by the victors. So we're only getting one perspective from half the story. We're not even getting the one perspective of the full story. We're not getting it from, a bystander who's seeing both sides and taking it in and kind of writing his or her perception of how it went down. It's like, no, it's one perspective from one side of the coin. And that's what we're told and that's what we're taught. And then it's taught as if it's like vital information to understand. I've been like, I'm more interested in history now, but like in school, just going through the ho hum of like American Revolution and all that shit was, I was like, why the fuck am I learning about this? Like what about this is going to benefit me in any way, shape, or form? And no one really ever had a great answer. They were like, well, it's important to know about your country's history.
You'll fit in with everybody who knows and believes the same stuff.
Exactly. Oh my gosh. It's so funny how much of school is just that. Just like knowing a date of when a war was. It's
My
like,
personal favorite is how much your country and my own pounds on World War II. Like we went in there and we stopped the dreaded Nazis from wiping out all of those innocent Jewish people. Whereas 100 years before, we were wiping out, not even 100 years before, currently at the time, they were still wiping out fucking indigenous people. Nobody talks about that.
yeah, exactly. Like same fucking thing. But it's just we're on one side versus the other. It's fucking wild.
Indeed, it is. Absolutely. This has been an excellent episode of Dualistic Unity Social. Thank you, everyone who could join us. Of course, we will be back next week, Sunday. We're going to have our regular episode of Dualistic Unity Raw. Wednesday, tomorrow, we have our free group chat, which you can join. Just register at dualisticunity.com in the live events section, 6 p.m. Eastern Time. You can be in a giant group Zoom with us. We do group Zooms 5 days a week on Patreon, patreon.com/dualisticunity. Do join us if you can. There's a bunch of great shit that's involved with being a tier 1, tier 2, or tier 3 supporter, including discounts to our retreats. This has been a blast. I will see you in 15 minutes.
Sounds good.